Benjamin Weinthal is the European Affairs correspondent at the Jerusalem Post, research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and his new column is in today's New York Daily News, titled, "Iran Will Cheat and Get Away with It. That's the lesson of recent history, and the nuclear agreement will fail to impose any consequences." Back for the second time this week. That's how much we love and respect this guy. Live from Germany, Ben Weinthal. Good morning, Ben.
Good morning, Sid.
Thank
Great
you.
to be on the show again.
Thank you for all the nice things you say. I mean, I don't know if you know. I mean, it really means a lot to me. So thank you very much.
Well, you were, much to my disappointment, you were right in terms of your deep
I got lucky. Come on.
skepticism
I
about
got lucky.
this Iran deal.
You know, honestly, I didn't get lucky. And I was right because, and I'm amazed by this, when I watched John Kerry and I watched Barack Obama and I talked to some of my liberal friends, this is not rocket science. This is real easy to figure out, A, what our agenda is, B, how well Iran did, and C, that it's a bad deal. I don't think you got to go to Harvard to figure this thing out, Ben.
I agree. I mean, take one provision from this agreement where if there's a violation and Iran cheats, as they've been cheating since the last agreement, the interim agreement in 2013, they haven't deviated from their deceptive practices. The U.S. or another government would have to file a complaint with a joint commission made up of the world powers. Iran would then have 24 days to allow inspectors to come in. That means they have 24 days to hide their illegal activities. That's the equivalent of if there's a drug dealer in Miami, for example, and the police want to raid that drug nest, they would have to wait 24 days before they could raid it.
Wow, that's ridiculous. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you were just on a couple of days ago, and you had just done a story, Fox News, that with this deal just about done, the ink about to dry, that you became aware that all this time, even a couple of days ago, Iran is in fact violating this deal, breaking all the rules.
In my backyard in Germany, where there's a lot of important technology, nuclear technology for Iran's facilities, because one of them is German-made, for example, they've been procuring the Iranian spy network here, according to Germany's intelligence agency, illicit equipment for their missile program and their nuclear program since 2013, since the last agreement was reached in which Iran was supposed to stop this type of activity. And not one government has clamped down on Iran's activities because all this was supposed to be administered by a UN committee that was supposed to stop this type of activity, and it turned out to be a big farce.
I'll tell you what's also mind-boggling to me, and we talked about this a couple of days ago, is this deal doesn't say stop. You just talked about stopping. Stop, cease it, it's over, it's done. It limits. Again, if I've got these specifics wrong, you can correct me. I think they're talking about shutting down 2/3 of the centrifuges. That means 1/3 is not shut down. I mean, we're not telling them to stop everything. We're saying slow it down, so it's going to take you 8 to 10 years to build a nuclear bomb rather than one. I mean, how mind-boggling is that?
It's very bizarre. I mean, this administration went from demanding that Iran stop enriching uranium, which is used, of course, to build a nuclear weapon, the material. 6 UN resolutions said Iran must stop enriching uranium, and all this was gutted because of this concessionary agreement. It's very disturbing. Obama and Kerry have profoundly misjudged the revolutionary nature of the clerical regime in Tehran. They've disrupted relations in the Middle East in a way that's going to do enormous damage to American security and American security interests. They've allowed Iran to become the dominant partner in the Middle East.
I wonder if, we talk about how this deal will allow us to really check out these sites more. And again, just go back to the 2/3 and 1/3 centrifuges. Even this deal does not allow us to go everywhere. But, I would imagine with satellites, with drones, outside of the inspectors actually getting into these things, do you think, Ben, that we've got other technology that's going to allow us to find out what we can't already find out about the Iranians, if in fact they're breaking some of the rules?
I'm excessively skeptical, largely because if you look at the history of U.S. intelligence, and I'm not here to trash the U.S. intelligence services, because they are very good and very sophisticated, but they've misjudged and misread the development of nuclear weapons programs in Pakistan, in India, of course, in Iran.
Yeah.
So there's a long history of the U.S. intelligence agency, for example, the CIA, completely misreading when a country is going to go nuclear. I don't see the U.S. being able to access that type of intelligence.
Mike in Coral Springs says, can you ask Ben Weinthal where they're going to ship all this fuel to from Iran, which was part of Obama's speech yesterday? Familiar with that, those specifics?
Well, the idea is that some of this nuclear fuel will be shipped to Russia outside of Iran. The Russians, of course, are helped build a nuclear plant in Bushehr in southern Iran that's operating, which actually could be turned into as a pathway to a nuclear weapon.
Gotcha.
I don't think the Russians want that to happen, and I think they are monitoring that. But at the same time, you're dealing with a very devious regime. Whether Russia and the United States can monitor the shipment of fuel is real. There's a big question mark over that activity.
All right. So very easy to handicap how Netanyahu felt yesterday. He did not pull any punches. He called it maybe the all-time worst deal ever, historically bad. But I did like the fact that he said, listen, here in Israel, we are not bound by this horrible agreement, and we're going to basically do whatever we have to do. So maybe the United States is going to sit around for 10 years when Obama's long gone and see how this thing works out. My opinion is, and I shared this conversation with Bernard McGurk yesterday from IMIS, is that somebody in the Middle East, and hopefully it's Israel, will act way before the 10 years, 15 years that are all part of the U.S. deal. You think that's a good possibility?
Well, I think the Israelis certainly, have a very sophisticated intelligence service, and the bulk of their activity has been devoted to monitoring Iran. It's certainly possible. I mean, what animates Israel's foreign policy is, of course, this doctrine that was formulated by Menachem Begin, former prime minister, who said that if any other country in the region develops a nuclear weapons device, we will knock it out. We want to remain the sole nuclear armed power in the region. Of course, Israel's policy is ambiguous. They neither confirm nor deny that they have nuclear weapons, but this is a country that's not willing to use nuclear weapons and not threatening the destruction of its neighbors, in contrast to Iran, which, every other day there's a new proclamation from the supreme leader or another Iranian leader, like the president, the so-called moderate President Rouhani, calling for the obliteration of Israel.
Yeah. How does Obama and Kerry not address that, get away with that? Are they going to say, well, he's just some crazy radical, and they've existed in Iran for a long time, going back to the Shahs and all that stuff, and we're trying to move past that because, as you pointed out, Ben, we're just a couple of days, not weeks, not years, and Netanyahu said the same thing, a couple of days removed from people in Tehran burning the American flag, burning the Israeli flag, death to America, death to the Jews, a couple of days away from that, and here we are celebrating with these people, and they've got hostages too, American hostages. How does our administration just kind of sweep all that under the rug and move forward with this?
Well, I think it's nothing more intellectually complex than the administration is engaged in some very soggy appeasement. I would call it uber appeasement at this point toward Iran. They don't understand, first of all, that you're dealing with a highly dangerous regime, the leading state sponsor of terrorism, according to John Kerry's State Department, that lists Iran as the leading sponsor of terrorism. And this regime, ideology matters. For the American government, they're consumed with sort of a pragmatic approach where they can get to yes, sort of a legalistic approach to foreign policy, whereas this regime is concerned about exporting terrorism and gobbling up the Middle East.
Right. It's funny. Here's the perfect example of what I'm trying to talk about here, Ben, too. Talking to just the average guy on the streets. I mean, you're brilliant, you are, and savvy, you know all this stuff. But the average guy, my buddy Andy Stellino says, I tried to explain the nuclear deal that Obama made to my 15-year-old daughter. She said, Dad, if this is a deal, then what are we getting in return? I really couldn't answer.
That's a great anecdote. I really think that sums it up. What are we getting in return? What's the reciprocity factor here? And I don't, one could say, well, he curbed the program Obama for 10 years. But as you mentioned earlier, after 10 years, Iran can dash to making a deliverable atomic bomb. Even Obama said that in year 13, 14, 15, the breakout times for a nuclear weapon would have shrunk almost down to zero. With his new deal, he said that a few months ago, with this new deal, the breakout time drops to 10 years.
Wow.
So he's deviated from his 13, 14, 15-year period. The bottom line is in 2025 in the United States, America will be confronted with a nuclear-armed Iran with probably intercontinental ballistics that can be launched from Iran to the United States, because the U.S. also agreed, Obama, to allow Iran to secure missiles after 8 years.
Right, ballistic missiles. So by that time, the Chinese or the Russians, whoever, will figure out, which they've already done, how to shut down all of our defense. They just what happened last week here with the stock market and the Wall Street Journal and them grounding United Airlines flights. They've already had a couple of successful little playing cyber attacks. So in 10 years, they'll figure out how to shut down all of our defense, because they're in bed with Iran anyway. Iran will send a nuclear bomb our way, and we'll all be gone. But Obama, what a great job he did.
It's shocking because, as you point out, Vladimir Putin's military industrial complex will benefit from this Iran deal. After 5 years, Obama waived the restriction on conventional warfare sales, a UN restriction, and the embargo on missiles, which were not supposed to be part of this nuclear weapons deal. So Obama threw another concession in with conventional weapons. That means Iran will buy missiles and conventional warfare technology from Russia and use it against Americans in the Middle East
or
and
Israel.
Other countries.
Or Israel. And here's the worst part of this deal. If, in fact, this deal, John Kerry said, listen, here's the deal. For the next 10 years, we're going to limit what they can do. We're going to see if they can play nice. That's one thing. Here is what John Kerry keeps refusing to mention, where this deal becomes great for Iran and bad for everybody else. The billions of dollars that are going to... I mean, Iran right now is they're crippled. They can't do a damn thing. We're giving them billions of dollars of relief. We are allowing them to breathe again. So, and Kerry never mentions this. Whether they abide by this or not doesn't matter. We are literally saving them from drowning, which in the end is what's going to kill a lot of people.
Right. I mean, it's an interesting point, and it's been neglected, I think, in the media, is Iran will get $150 billion at the front end of this agreement. Huge amount of money to use for terrorism, to support their terrorist proxies, Hezbollah and Hamas, against Israel, of course. But at the same time, if Obama had continued with that sanctions policy, there was a good chance that there could have been regime change. That is without war, but in order to transform the regime into a democratic, secular, Western-oriented government. Think about it. In 2009, when ordinary Iranians went on the streets calling for a change, Obama stood on the sidelines. They were holding signs and screaming, Obama, are you with us or are you against us? In the end, he ended up supporting Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, former president.
I mean, he actually did. He supported Ahmadinejad. So I think about this now, and I say, well, hold on a second. I got a guy like Ron Kuby, a very liberal talk show host, WABC New York, on with me yesterday, yelling at me, what do you want us to do, Sid? Bomb them? Yeah. John Kerry says during his speech yesterday, well, this is certainly better than bombing them. And why? I mean, in the end, wouldn't you rather, and I know people die, and it's always sad, and blah, blah, blah. Let's move past that, okay? Seriously. In the end, isn't that better than a bad deal?
Well, two things. One is, back to your point, Iran's economy is so fragile, so wobbly, that more sanctions could have dissolved the mullah
Could have killed them anyway. You're right. Right.
Now, again, I think this dichotomy between military strikes and a deal is a false dichotomy that Obama uses and Kerry to scare people into accepting a concessionary deal. In the end, if military strikes are necessary, of course they should be used. Even a majority of the American public has said that in surveys. And if Obama really if there was more saber rattling from this administration, he could have secured more concessions.
That's a very good point. You're right. I mean, they really were. They were practically crippled, and we're allowing them now to walk. All right, listen. On the way out, then you're very close. You're in Israel. You're right with the Jerusalem Post. You've got a great pulse of the Jewish population around the world. In fact, you told me just a couple of days ago that Jewish folks in Germany and France would be best off leaving and going back to Israel. That's how anti-Semitism has really gotten that ugly all over Europe, where you're stationed here in Germany. So you tell me, just how nervous is Israel this morning? I know Netanyahu seemed pissed, but how pissed is he really, and how aggressive do you think Israel can get in a short amount of time?
Well, if you look at the comments from the left to the right in Israel right now, all parties, politicians reject this agreement. So it's not a question of Netanyahu and a right of center government or a right-wing government. All Israelis in general overwhelmingly reject this deal and are concerned about it. Now you're asking me what can Israel do in response? Well, the Netanyahu administration and ambassador and Israel's ambassador in Washington are lobbying right now, are urging Congress to reject this deal, and they'll be voting on it. Some politicians in Florida have come out strongly against the deal, like Senator Rubio. I don't know where Senator Bill Nelson stands on this. It's going to be contingent on the Democratic vote and whether they're willing to oppose the deal. I know Congressman Deutsch, who was at a function at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, is very critical of Iran and has taken a very strong posture against Iran. I don't know where Debbie Wasserman Schultz stands on this. She's a Democrat. These are the key players. Yeah. And they're going to have to decide whether they want to
no, they're going to get it. They're going to get it because he's got Pelosi and Nancy's got a bunch of folks in her corner. So I know you mentioned some some big names and some influential folks in the party, but I think Pelosi will be the one to push this thing through, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Oh, that sucks, I know. You sounded so disgruntled just now. Yeah. Oh, boy.
Well, I think it's an uphill battle, but I still think, one can prevail. I think most Americans, especially of my age, folks who grew up in America in the 30s and 40s, remember Iran. They remember the hostage crisis in 1979. Sure. They know this regime is deadly and wants to kill Americans and has killed Americans in the Middle East. So I'm optimistic that I think once the details of this deal are explained to people and congressional representatives, they'll see how it really endangers America and its allies, Israel, and Jews across the world, because Iran's going to use the funds from this deal to kill Israelis and Jews in Europe and in Argentina. That's what they've been doing since 1979.
Unreal. Well, thank you. I went to Brooklyn College, Ben, in the mid-'80s, and one of the professors at Brooklyn College was one of the hostages. And when he came back, he went back and taught again in Brooklyn at Brooklyn College. And he was he became kind of the face, if you will, of those hostages that eventually returned home once Ronald Reagan took over for Jimmy Carter. I can't thank you enough. Your work is great. Your article in the New York Daily News, Iran will cheat and get away with it. That's the lesson of recent history, and the nuclear agreement will fail to impose consequences. Your 2 appearances this week, Ben, and your constant appearances on the show, you're teaching us an awful lot, and we really appreciate it and love you, so thank you.
Thanks, Sid. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, buddy. That's Benjamin Weinthal.
Sid, it's always a pleasure.
Thank you, buddy. That's Benjamin Weinthal.
Sid, it's always a pleasure.
Thank you, buddy. That's Benjamin.